a lot of brands and companies and even creators are doing their product launches using NFTs. And they're primarily doing it as free NFTs.
Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Richard Chan. If you don't know who Richard is, you need to know Richard. He is the co-founder of Manifold. Manifold creates NFT tools that enable creators to take advantage of Web3. Richard, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
Hey, Michael, good to be here.
So today, Richard and I are going to explore why NFTs are so important for creators and businesses, and also explore an easy way to mint NFTs. Now, Richard, before we go there, I want to hear your backstory. Like, how'd you get into NFTs? How'd you get into Web3? Start wherever you want to start.
Yeah. So, I've been in crypto for, almost a decade now. I started off in early Bitcoin, started building tools in that space. Ended up leaving crypto for a little while just because all we were doing was moving money back and forth. And that wasn't really interesting from a technological or programmatic standpoint. And then I would say I came back into crypto and Web3 in 2021 when my co-founder at Manifold sent me an NFT he had just purchased. And I looked at this thing as like, what is this thing? It made absolutely no sense to me. He purchased a JPEG. And, I was just perplexed, what did he actually buy? He spent like $1,000 on it. So I was like, okay, $1,000 is a pretty tough change. And then I was just like, cool, art looked cool, but I thought nothing of it. A week later, he sends you another one. He spent $1,500 on this one. And I was still like, cool, but still just like not quite getting it. And then a week later, he's like, okay, you got to get into this, right? So he's like, we're going to sit down and we're going to buy an NFT together. I need your help to buy them actually, because it was on a platform called Nifty Gateway, and it was first come, first serve. So meaning that there were 15 NFTs for sale, and it was the first person to click the button was the person who ended up being able to purchase it. And so we sat on a Zoom call together, we set up the accounts, and he's like, okay. I'm like, what do you got to do? He's like, at 4 p.m., click the button. And I was just like, this is ridiculous, right? And so you're saying that everyone in the world is trying to click the button at 4 p.m., and the first person to click it is the person who gets to have to repurchase it. And he's like, yeah, that's the story, right? And so I was like, okay, I'll humor you on this. And so I set up my account into the gateway, go through the site, and I'm like, as a programmer, I'm like, okay, you can just enable the button programmatically and click it. And so I did that, got to my buy page, I did it again. There was a web request there. And so, being a programmer, I was like, why don't I just automate this? And so we automated this whole process, put in a curl command, which is, a script.
Wait. So before we understand, are we still on the story, or are you
no,
like, oh, okay.
This is how I got into NFTs, right?
Yeah. I didn't know it already, we're still on the story where you're trying to win one of the 15 NFTs.
Yeah. No worries.
Okay, keep going.
So technically we're trying to be smarter than everyone else. Instead of just clicking the button when the 4 p.m. comes, we just get the computer clicking for us.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, 4 p.m. comes, I click the button anyway, and my script is going off in the background. It's like, sold out. I'm like, well, that happened. It was like instantaneous, right? And, too much fanfare, everything's sold out. I'm like, looks like we can get it. And then about a minute later, I did an email saying that I had purchased one of these things. And, the thing is, this NFT costed $4,000. And I was just like, okay, what did we purchase? He's like, congrats, bro. You just bought your first NFT. And I'm like, cool. I'm like, so what did I buy? And what can I do with it? And he's like, well, you can only do 3 things with it right now. You can, you can sell it, you can transfer it, you can hold it. The art was pretty cool. I got it. So it was my first NFT. My first, it was by an artist called Slime Sunday. And yeah, it was just super cool at the time. And my co-founder was like, yeah, I think the most interesting for us to do is try to sell this thing. And so I'm like, okay, how much do we sell it for? And he's like, she deliberated. He's like, let's try $15,000. And I was like, wait, what? $15,000? Who's going to buy it for $50,000? And he's like, bro, you're going to be mad. We've spent 20 minutes buying this thing. If it sells for $15,000, we get $11,000. And right. And I'm like, of course I'm not going to be mad, right? You just made $11,000. And so we listed it. We caught up because, this is just COVID was just at the tail end and we haven't talked for a while. And as soon as we caught up, I got an email saying it's sold for $50,000. And I was just like, what just happened here? I just completely perplexed. Lots of emotions. For one, my first thing was like, oh no, we sold it for too low because it sold so fast. right? Which is kind of ridiculous because I was like, who's going to buy this thing for $15,000, like, a few minutes ago. My second emotion was like, I had this thing that I didn't have anymore. And it made me like, it's just like this whole idea of like loss, right? And at that point, I realized, oh my God, there's something like big here, right? And this is the big thing that crypto was looking for, the actual consumer application of, of crypto for, the masses. And, it was something that was very easy to understand, collecting things. And, to me, it was the emotional reaction I had that made everything real. And so from there, I just started diving in, deeper. Like, first of all, how do I do that again? When I'll admit, when I first got into it, there was a big financial aspect to it. But as we started, collecting this space and they were learning more about, what was actually going on here, it just became clear that this was sort of the future of visual objects. And we started building, tools for ourselves and started working with creators. And that eventually led to the creation of Manifold.
So, fascinating story. And somewhere along the way, you ended up getting a CryptoPunk with 3D glasses, and that's part of your identity right now for those that are watching on video. But what was the first company you created Manifold in this space, or was there another business that came before that?
No, it was Manifold. Manifold's the first thing.
So tell us a little bit about what was the idea when you decided to create Manifold, and when did you create it? Tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so I would say Manifold started, okay, so the official anniversary of Manifold is April 1st. So 2 years and like 3 days ago from today. And, how it started was we started off as, I would say, collectors in the space. And so we started off just collecting NFTs because we thought they're cool. We're trying to understand what was happening. As we started collecting artworks, every single artist that we were patrons of, they were just very grateful for, for us collecting their works. And as we started talking to artists, we started learning about, some of their backgrounds of why they were NFTs, how they got started. And a lot of these artists were coming from, I would say, the creative industries, but they were working, client jobs, working for different agencies, and really kind of living paycheck to paycheck at that point because, they couldn't make a living off their own artwork, right? The way they would make a living would be by selling, digital prints, digital copies of the artwork. But there was really no like monetization strategy for them. And most prints went for like, $10, $20 or so, the amount for a poster. And so when NFTs came along, it really gave them an avenue for the very first time to sell their artwork, as with the same level of, provenance as, physical artwork, right? And now they had, could create digital artwork as an NFT and sell them for thousands of dollars, just like, an actual painting. And so you started realizing that these artists, this technology had just changed their lives. It had really given them a lot of control over, the output of their work, a lot of agency, and it really just validated their careers as artists themselves. And so when we started talking with artists about, what NFTs were, they're like, yeah, it's just a new way for us to sell things. But then, coming from sort of a blockchain and gaming background, myself and my co-founders, we realized that, there's so much more here. It's about, sovereignty. It's about agency, it's about control. It's about, the technology, the underlying technology that enables all of this. And so a lot of the artists actually didn't understand the technology of what was actually, happening. And so we started working with artists on just creating creator projects. So one of our very first projects was a project with an artist called Mad Dog Jones. So we were talking to him, we collected his artwork and we're talking to him and he's like, and we're like, did you like burn an NFT? And he's like, burn an NFT, what does that mean? He's like, you can destroy an NFT, right? And coming from a gaming background, we're like, a simple mechanic you could do is you can take your old NFTs, you can destroy them to create a new NFT. And he was like, wow, it's wild, right? It had never been done before. And so we worked with them on a campaign. It was called the Crash and Burn campaign on Nifty Gateway. We had a bunch of data from Nifty Gateway. We did a modeling, and sort of like we did exercise where we modeled all the collectors and decided, what was it right, levers to pull to kind of make this an interesting campaign. And, when we launched the campaign on Nifty Gateway, there's a drop. The drop did over $4 million by itself. But then the mechanic that we had invented, the burn redeeming mechanic, took the prices of the pieces that we were burning from $1,000 to $150,000 in the course of 2 weeks.
Wow.
And he was just like, wow, just because we had this interesting mechanic that it created this ripple effect for his ecosystem. And so from there, the next thing was like, how do we create something really cool? How do we just really create an awesome NFT? And so we collaborated with Mad Dog on another NFT project. It was called the Replicator. And we sold it at auction at Phillips for $4.2 million. And so, yeah, single NFT, right? And so the interesting thing about this NFT was that it was the very first time a major artwork had sold on its own smart contract. And, the reason why this is important is because this NFT, which is a conceptual piece of artwork, could only exist as an NFT, as a medium. Like there is no other medium that this NFT or this artwork could be expressed on. And the reason being is that the smart contract is actually part of the artwork itself. So the smart contract runs sort of the visual experience of the NFT. And the idea is it's a photocopier, and every single month a new copy of this NFT gets generated, and it's also deterministic, and so or probabilistic, right? So what that means is that next month it may or may not print another NFT, right? Or it could jam because it's a photocopier, and then over the course of a year, it generated about I think like 180 NFTs of various fashions. Various creations as imagined by Mad Dog Jones. And Mad Dog Jones really had a lot of fun with it. It's sort of like interactive or experiential because every single month Mad Dog had to create a new artwork for this thing to print. And he would, take a look at the market, be like, hey, what's some cool stuff going on? He actually built that into it. And so, yeah, like I said, this is the very first time that a major artwork had sold on a smart contract. Previously, it had all been on platform contracts. And once that was done, once that all wrapped up, everyone's like, wow, that was very cool. And artists started thinking to themselves, what does it mean for myself to have a smart contract? And that's when we created the Manifold Creator Contract, which is the very first product that Manifold launched. And we started releasing those as artists. And, it really enabled artists to, one, have, agency over, how they operate in Web3. And two, it really made it so that people started thinking about NFTs, not just as, images as JPEGs, but as an expressive medium that could create very interactive, experiences.
What I love about, and we're going to get into what Manifold makes possible a little bit later in the interview, but when I first started my exploration into Web3, one of the biggest challenges for anyone who's creative that wants to do an NFT project is the whole contract side of it. Mm-hmm. What I love about what Manifold is doing is essentially you're kind of providing that tool, for lack of better words, that enables creative people to not have to worry about the technical contract implementation side of it, which is so much of a barrier right now on the creative side. Now we're going to get into all the amazing things that Manifold makes possible. But before we go there are creators and business people listening to this show that might not yet understand why NFTs are so important and why digital goods ultimately are so important. So since you've been so immersed in the space, what do you want to say to those that are maybe a little skeptical?
Yeah. So I'd say, what I normally say is you got to take it back down to what does the technology enable? And so, it's almost like the narrative we're having right now is very similar to early crypto days. People always say, crypto's a scam. It's not useful. It's just like a Ponzi, right? A lot of those same conversations I had, in the early Bitcoin days, I'm also having help with NFTs. But, you have to kind of think about, what's the long-term goal and long-term vision? And what is, like I said, what does the technology enable? And so fundamentally, what I think that the blockchain technology and NFTs in general enable is that they allow digital objects to have properties of real world objects. And so what that means, especially around ownership. And so why is that important? As we spend more and more of our lives online, experiencing things and, kind of navigating, or not really navigating, but just like, as we spend more time online, digital objects are really just an extension of the real world, right? And so if you think about, I own something, right? Why can't I own something that is digital? And so, an example of this is, let's say, like Roblox, for example, or, these metaverse games, or all these games that kids are playing these days. They're very used to the idea of owning something in these games, right? Their identity, different objects, but they actually don't own them. And so when you have, and if they're backed by NFTs, you can actually say, I own this, right? And no one can take that away from me. When you think about, as a business person, if you are creating something, you're usually working with a platform on doing so. And, these platforms really have full control over, the methods of display, content, interactions, and they really control the audiences. And so, I've heard many different cases, from many different artists we worked with, right? Musicians, brands, so on, was that, they spent years building up an audience on different platforms, whether it be Spotify, Facebook, Instagram. And then all of a sudden the algorithm changed, right? Or, Facebook started charging to get access to their audience, right? And these were audiences that they had spent years building up. And all of a sudden, Facebook was like, oh, yeah, now you have to charge, now we're going to charge you in order to reach the audience that you built. And they're like, well, what are we going to do? We spent years building these things, right? And they really had no control over it. And then on top of that too, it's, when they want to, really connect with this audience, right? They really don't have the proper channels to do so. And so, what NFTs kind of enable is that they kind of flip that narrative on its head. So instead of, you have a platform in the middle, you have, creators and people building audiences and, the consumers in that kind of bubble, right? NFTs make it so it's the other way around, so that creators can now become in the middle and own the platform and have a direct relationship with their audiences. And the platforms can come around and say, hey, you have NFTs, we're going to build functionality on top of this that your audience and yourself can engage in. And then as one of these owners or as a creator who's kind of in this ecosystem, if you don't kind of like what the platform is doing, you're just to tell your audience, hey, we're going to move over here now. And, your whole audience is now portable.
Yeah, it's a fascinating paradigm shift, right? Because my company is called Social Media Examiner. We've been around since 2009. We've taught the world and creators how to essentially use the social platforms to, grow the audience and ultimately engage and sell products and services. And the whole world of Web3 and NFTs is kind of starting to flip it on its head a little bit. You still need access to social typically today. We use Discord, we use Twitter, ... But I'm sure eventually, but in the end, we own, if you will, the relationship. We know who they are. If we want to be able to get them down to the contract level, we can do that with NFTs. What I would love to explore with you is utility a little bit. Let's talk about some of the cool things that you can do specifically with NFT projects. Maybe let's start with product launches and what your thoughts are on using NFTs to launch products. And then we can maybe get into like music, art, collectibles, and all that other kind of fun stuff.
Yeah. So, we've seen, Manifold specifically, we've seen a lot of innovative use case around product launches, right? Like linking NFTs to launching a product or a service. And why is that interesting? Because when somebody collects an NFT, it's saying that, hey, I'm a fan. I'm engaging with the brand. It also costs money to do so, right? Because like every single transaction that you do on the Ethereum network costs gas. And so, there's a saying that it's like, the hardest thing to do is get someone to pull out their wallet. It's either free or even paying $1 is like, is overcoming that hurdle. And so when someone collects NFT, they're saying like, hey, yeah, I'm willing to pull my wallet to collect this thing. And it really creates this really strong tie between the collector and the creator, right? And so specifically for product launches, what we've seen is a lot of brands and companies and even creators are doing their product launches using NFTs. And they're primarily doing it as free NFTs. So free being just pay the gas fees. But what it does is that it creates an audience that is very wide, right? And very wide and very engaged. And then what they're doing with these NFTs after the fact is that they're doing kind of re-engagement campaigns. And so these re-engagement campaigns that they'll look like you can either take your NFT, you can burn it for something. You can take the NFT, redeem it for physical merch, in real life events, digital content. And, what it's saying is that the utility of the NFT is not just the NFT itself, it's everything you get around it, right? So it's almost like they're using it as, as pretty much like, high engagement marketing for, the people who are collecting these things.
Yeah. As of literally right now, for anybody who's part of the Yuga ecosystem, they dropped their other deed to the other side land, a while back to everybody who had a Bored Ape, I believe, or a Mutant Ape. And now you can burn that NFT to get this new thing, which is a evolved version of the land. And then this coda, if you happen to have one with a coda on it. And if not, they've got this other thing called vessels, right? And I just did that literally this morning, right? So I'm taking that old NFT, I'm burning it. I'm essentially destroying sending it to a null contract, right? And then I'm getting two NFTs out of it that each have their own independent value. And have you seen any other interesting ways that from a launch perspective, like what are people doing on the launch side of things? I would imagine in some cases they could sell NFTs to fund a product launch as well. Are you seeing that happen as well?
Yeah, we're seeing lots of, we're seeing many use cases for NFTs, including, like launching project and using the funds for doing so. And then also tracking that, if you are kind of an early holder or a supporter, then you're going to get something down the line, right? Whether it be merch or access to, the end product itself. In this model, we sort of see NFTs as being like patronage plus, right? And so you have, platforms like Patreon and Kickstarter, but NFTs are just like, the platformless way of kind of achieving the same thing.
Okay, so let's talk about the artist side of things, right? We've got on Manifold, you've got musicians, you've got graphics artists, and you've got, I would imagine, I don't know, video artists as well. Like, what are some of the applications that can happen on the artist side? I know you spoke earlier about an artist that you guys started working with in the beginning, but I'm curious, like nowadays, how are people, especially creatives, using the platform?
Yeah, so I would say that the big thing, there are many different facets for creators. On one side of things, there's just pure art, right? So a digital creator can come in and be like, "Hey, I can make art," and just sell it, for a price to collectors. There are also people creating like interactive campaigns, right? And so some people are like, "Hey, collect this NFT," and then there's a kind of a game behind it. And so, collect the NFT. If you collect this NFT, then you can go down this map of, burn this NFT to this other NFT. We just introduced some functionality where we can start remixing NFTs and or combining NFTs together, right? And so it's really interesting to see what creators are doing with this because, some creators right now being like, "Hey, you collected one of my NFT before, you collected the NFT of, one of my artist friends. Let's burn them together to get kind of a remix collab, right?" And it's very common in music, but now there's a way to kind of monetize that for digital artists. We're seeing people create sort of like memberships, right? So memberships have been a very big kind of segment. Reasoning is that, it creates a direct to consumer relationship and it really makes it so that, if someone is a member and then, there are various things they can do, right? So they can participate in the ecosystem, but, if they're not happy with it, they can just sell the membership to somebody else, right? And that's like part of the benefits of, having this like portable or not portable, but interoperable like ecosystem. And also, part of having everything be on chain is that you can then take these, NFTs that you've created and any other community can ingest the information because it's all on chain, it's all available publicly. And so you could be like, "Hey, if you're a member of this one club, we started another, project, and any member of that club has access to these features and benefits."
Okay, so I've got a million questions now specifically about Manifold. So, First of all, Manifold it is interoperable. If you use the Manifold.xyz website, it is interoperable with OpenSea and all the major exchanges or Blur. Is that true? Let's start there because obviously anybody who's listening right now that wants to go and launch an NFT project, could they just go to Manifold and would that contract end up showing up on OpenSea?
Yeah. So the way we design Manifold is that we think of ourselves as, being the creators platform. Our saying has always been the creators of the platform. And so we've worked very hard to make sure that everything that Manifold does is interoperable with every other kind of platform in the ecosystem. And so our contracts are the only contracts that, once you mint an NFT on them, you can then take these NFTs and bring them to, OpenSea, Bearable, Blur, the permissionless platforms, so Lookfair, but also the permission platforms are compatible with, right? So that means like Super Rare, Foundation, and Nifty Gateway. And so ours are the only contracts that, are compatible with across the board for all major marketplaces.
One of the things that I hear a lot of people on the show talking about is it's really important to get the contract right because you can't change the contract once it's executed, right?
Yes, that's right.
So how are you guys, is there an advantage? Are you learning things and changing the way you guys generate contracts based on bugs that get revealed over time? Do you understand what I'm asking? Because like somebody copies someone else's contract, they may not know that there's like a challenge with that contract. Are you guys always refining this? Or have you designed a contract that can actually be updatable? I'm outside my technical knowledge. I'm just asking a question that I think maybe others have on their mind.
Yeah. So actually, we've only done one upgrade of our contract ever since launch. And so, the very first Manifold Creator contract, it was really designed architecturally to be very different. And, the big, to be a bit more technical about it, is that, the pattern that most people used, it was called upgradable proxy, which meant that the creator at any time could go underneath and change the underlying implementation in the contract. That did well with us because that mean that whoever kind of had control of the contract could just change everything on a whim. Like, for example, if I had a contract that was upgradable and said, Michael, you have collected one of my NFTs, I can then at a later date say, I don't like that you collected one of my NFTs. I'm just going to take it away from you. And so, if you have an upgradable contract, that is actually possible to do. And so the way Manifold is designed is that we actually have very strong guarantees around, the functionality of the contract. But what we do that is kind of different than everybody else is that we created this kind of extension framework where you can install modules onto the contract to extend the functionality and, effectively sort of like upgrade, what you can do on those contracts. And so what that means is that you just have to have one contract and then you could just add all these sort of like, modules of different features on this contract to really create new experiences.
Which I want to talk about right now, which I think is super exciting. So let's talk about open editions first. Like, explain to everybody what that is and what you can do with that so they can wrap their head around that.
Yeah. So an open edition NFT is, a single NFT that has multiple copies of it, right? So you can think of it as, one artwork, but then, many different people had collected artwork. There's two versions of an open edition. One is a 721 and one is an 1165. And so, a 721 is like saying, I have a poster and I'm going to label each poster, let's say I have 10 copies of a poster and all these posters are going to say, this is poster number one, put number one on it, number two, all the way to number 10. Right. So that's a 721 version. And each one of those is a unique poster. And
that's kind of the more common use case today that most people are doing with this.
I would say, no, that's not the common use case. That was the traditional use.
Oh, okay.
Traditional use case, right? And so the common use case is to use an 1155. And the 1155 just says, hey, I printed, 10 versions of these posters. They're all the same. It doesn't matter who owns which one. They're all the same. There's no numbers. There's no unique. Each one is not unique, but, anybody can collect these things and you could have multiple of them. And it just says, I have a balance of these, I have a number of these posters in my private collector. And so, why do people like one another? So some people like the fungibility, a 721 is non-fungible, which means that everyone is unique. And so what that means is that, if you have one, if I transfer it to you, then it says I transferred poster number one from Richard to Michael. But, there are some limitations of that because if I think about NFTs as building blocks for future items, that means that if you want to do something with that NFT later on, you have to be like, okay, I need posters 1 through 10 to be part of this other ecosystem. Whereas with the 1155, it's like a fundamental building block of saying, hey, just this, anybody who has this one poster can then go do subsequent things with it. And so
without getting super technical here, what I think is exciting about open editions is the timing and the fact that you can this is where it gets super Amber Victoria had an open edition on one of her pieces of art and it was for 3 hours, right? And then you can mint as many as you wanted for a price as long as you got it done within that time frame. Isn't that kind of it? They tend to be potentially unlimited. Is that correct? When we say open editions, is that generally what that means?
Yeah. So open editions means that there's no guarantee about how many will be minted. So yeah, right. There's different variations. So some people call it, there's limited edition, open edition, timed editions, right? And so, there's different nomenclature around, the different mechanics, but open editions can generally seen as there are multiple of these, NFTs being created and, it's not quite sure, how many are going to be created at the end of the day.
And what's exciting about this from a creator perspective is, you can make a lot of money with these, right? Because if you've got a decent sized audience and you do an open, normally when creators are launching NFTs, they might just have 10 of them or 100 of them and that's it. And they're kind of pricey, but with open editions, I've seen a lot of them lowering the price, but restricting the time frame, right? And it's whoever gets it, gets it. And it's kind of like almost like a lottery, right? Because you have no idea how many they're going to be, but you know what the price is. And we've seen a lot of creators make a substantial amount of money doing these open editions. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yep. But I would say it's there's two versions of this, right? So there's the version where you're selling a digital good, which is the NFT, as an open edition, right? And you are kind of generate income from that. The other version is that there's a lot of creators are doing free NFTs, right, or very low priced NFTs, right? We're talking about like $0 to $5. And what they're doing, why this is kind of interesting, is that they're using this to build audiences, right? It's almost like I want to be a patron of this creator. I'm interested in what they're going to do in the future, or I might just like their artwork, right? It's like saying, I'm willing to buy this piece of digital work for $5, which is the price of a coffee, right? There's kind of no expectations after the fact, but it's just like we have this inherent nature of wanting to collect things, and I think digital goods are just like part of that extension of of things that we are starting to collect now.
Well, and this is interesting because if it is free, the good news about an open edition is it seems like you can set a date range on it, right? Like you can say this open edition is going to be open forever, or you can say this open edition is only going to be open for a month, right? And then you can promote people to get it and it's free, but when it's closed, right? That's kind of the applications that we're seeing with a lot of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, correct.
Now I'm seeing when you combine the burn redeem thing, this is where I want to go back to that because you mentioned that a little bit. You mentioned earlier about the burn mechanic, right? Which is the ability to basically destroy an NFT in exchange for something, right? So talk to me a little bit about the burn redeem mechanics and options and how people are using them. Because I think that opens up a whole bunch of different models that are fascinating.
Yeah. So, when a lot of creators were creating NFTs, they'd always ask, what's next? I have these NFTs, collectors even ask, I bought this NFT, what's next, right? And so for a lot of people, it was always just about, sitting on the NFTs and just hoping that the price would go up, right? Kind of speculating on, the ecosystem of the creator. And so what the burn mechanic is that it creates a secondary engagement point for NFTs. And so now creators can be like, okay, I have these NFTs on the ecosystem. I want to do something with them, right? I can exchange for more. I can do something like, create more artwork, right? And what this does, it changes the supply of the original items that were created, and allows creators to really express different ways of taking one artwork and moving it to different ecosystems. And so as an example, right, so there's a really kind of like fun use case. So the creator of the NagChat, he created this he created a meme, which is NagChat, but around the same time he created something called the Nan Balloon. And so he never released that, right? So what he did is that he launched Nan Balloon as an open edition on Manifold. I think he sold 21,000 copies of this for about $10-15. And what he did afterwards was that he's gonna make a game out of this, right? And so he took each of these Nan balloons, which were a cat being carried by a red balloon, and said, over the course of a week, I'm going to release a new rainbow color balloon. And you can burn the original red balloon to get a different color balloons. And so what people end up doing is that they end up taking the Nan balloon and burning them to try to get the whole rainbow of whole assortment of rainbow balloons. And he capped it off by doing a rainbow, like an actual rainbow balloon Nan cat. And it just really created a lot of delight for the people who had engaged with this with this project.
Well, and what's interesting about this is, if I'm understanding you correctly, is he minted 25,000 or whatever the number was, really big, inexpensive. And then he came out with more rare balloons, right? Because everybody had one color balloon. In order to get these more rare balloons, you had to essentially trade or burn one of your balloons for one of these other balloons. And this is where now you introduce rarity into the collection, right? And that's where some of the collectors kind of go crazy, right? And I would imagine there's also burn redeems where you could say you've got to burn multiple of these to get something like this. Have you seen stuff like that?
Yeah, that's correct. So even for NagCat, the one, right? In order to get some of the rare ones, you have to burn 2 or 3 of the original ones, right? You can go further too. You can be like, hey, you got to burn X to get Y, Y to get Z, and so on. You also have the ability to monetize the burn itself. And so, for example, you could be like, here's a free open edition, but then if you want the subsequent artwork, then you have to pay to do the burn itself, right? And so what that does, it really creates this really interesting thing where, some people are using the open editions as currency to purchase future artworks,
Oh, that's interesting. Well, and also, I've also seen you got let's say you have an open edition, and then let's say you have another NFT that you're selling. Maybe the open edition is free, and then you've got another one that you're selling. You must have the open edition to buy the one that you want to buy, right? This is something that people do, right? And then that one that you buy might be a burnable token to get yet another NFT. You're seeing that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. It's really interesting because, when we created these tools, we kind of just said, hey, here's the tools, go wild with it. And we had no expectations of what creators do. We don't kind of enforce, different ideas and so on. But it's just been really amazing to see what the community of, artists and creators and, projects, anyone doing a project has, really done to leverage these tools.
Talk to me about royalty registry and also Shopify and a little bit with the merch bridge side of things.
Yeah. So, it comes back down. Okay. So I think royalties are a very hot topic. It's always been a hot topic for the longest time. So a lot of creators came in this space, and, one of the big things that they were told was that royalties were, one of the big reasons why creators were in the NFT space. So the idea behind a royalty is that when an NFT gets sold, there is a residual kind of, portion of that sale that goes back to the original creator. And that's kind of like on the blockchain itself. And so, for the longest time, every single marketplace had said, we believe in creator royalties and, royalties are important. And, they were just like a given in the space. So what that fact isn't actually true, right? The fact is that, the royalties were a social contract in the NFT space that were enforced on the marketplace side of things. So pretty much all marketplaces said, we believe in royalties, we believe in creators, so we're going to honor kind of this like royalty system that was kind of, created way back when the NFTs were first created, or when our marketplaces first started appearing. But given that market conditions changed, a few marketplaces said, hey, we're not going to pay creator royalties because we want to attract more collectors, right? And so it's almost like, they saw it as, by having cheaper prices or making more money for collectors or traders, that they would attract more, volume and so on. And so they got rid of royalties. And in response, some other platforms, followed suit and kind of got rid of royalties. And so Blur came in and said, hey, we don't deal with fees, we don't have royalties, and they took away everything. And then that took a lot of volume away from OpenSea, which then, they responded, and then they took away, fees and royalties also. So that's kind of like what was happening back then. It still is ongoing right now. It still hasn't been resolved. But, when it comes to royalties, Manifold has always stood, behind creators, right? So our contracts always had royalties from the very start. And as we were working with creators and these marketplaces, we realized that there was a problem. So one of the big problems was that there were a lot of contracts out there that didn't have royalties built into their didn't have royalties, the information of royalties on the contracts itself, right? So there's a EIP, it's called EIP, I think it's 1359, which is the royalty spec, which says, a contract can say, here are the royalties that I want on a sale. And so what ended up happening is that every single marketplace ended up creating their own version of royalties. And these were kind of closed systems. And every time a new marketplace came out, then that every single creator would have to go to the marketplace and configure the royalties, on the marketplace itself. And so the royalty registry was a initiative that we started at Manifold to kind of rectify that. So it's a two-part solution. So one of them is for creators. So creators can say, hey, here are my royalties I want for my contracts, even if your contract doesn't have royalties specified in them. And it's a way for developers of marketplaces that, ever pay royalties can say, there are royalties on contracts. I can just go to this one source of truth and say, here are the royalties needed, right? And so the royalty registry has been adopted by, all major marketplaces. And really it was our goal to kind of, bring royalties, to a common standard across the board.
Very cool. Very cool. So, talk to me about the Shopify thing, because there's a lot of people that are in e-commerce that might be fascinated by this.
Yeah. So, as we were talking earlier, a lot of people are using NFTs as sort of like a way to, either pre-sell items or even reward people who have, collected NFTs. And so one very common use case is to take an NFT and redeem it for a physical item. And so what we've done with the Shopify merch bridge is that we created a system so that, you can create a Shopify storefront. If you token get it by an NFT. So that says that if you own an NFT, then you will have access to physical merch on the store, right? And this merch can be paid, it can be free, and so forth. But really, what it really does is that it lets you kind of reward holders of the NFTs to say, here is something that you can now claim, right? And it ties the...
Only the people that have the NFTs get to the store in the first place is really...
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, question on PFP projects, right?
Sure.
Can you do a PFP project using Manifold or not? Because there is complexities, obviously, where every piece of art is different, inside of a series.
Yeah. You cannot... Okay, so technically you can do a PFP project for Manifold, but it's not easy. You have to be more kind of more of a developer.
Got it.
I think our goal has always been on NFTs itself and the art and the utility of the NFTs.
Got it.
One of the things that we said early on was that, we pretty much thought PFPs were mainly speculative in nature. And we said that we didn't want to kind of fuel that speculation as a company. And so, everything we do at Manifold has always been in the vein of how do we create, more technologically advanced PFPs or not NFTs. A lot of the code for PFPs are just like copy paste, right? So it's very easy to deploy PFP collection, by yourself or on another platform.
Got it. Okay. But so most of the use cases that people are doing with Manifold.xyz is the stuff that we've been talking about, like memberships, art. Question: how do y'all make money? Like, what's the business model? Does it cost money to use Manifold?
Yeah. So originally our business model was that we used to do collaborations with artists. And then so, we've worked on probably 24 of the biggest NFT projects in the space. And, these are all partnership projects that, Manifold took a cut of. Going forward on the platform side of things, we announced our revenue model in February. And that revenue model has been anything sold on a Manifold property. So these are, at that Manifold.xyz, including claim pages and brand redeems. We take a fee charged to the collector when the collector engages with the page. And so what that looks like, it's about 50 cents to $1. And the way we see it is that it's kind of like a gas fee, right? So, every single collector is used to paying gas fees when they read things or when they engage on the given arc, right? And so we're just saying, this is the gas fee for Manifold to operate our services. On the creator side of things, what that means is that everything is free. And so...
so it's like a fee when you're using like a ticketing site and they have like like Fandango has that little transaction fee, right? Is it a fee that's passed on to the consumer when they mint the NFT? Is that
yeah, that's correct.
Collected?
Yeah.
And it's a very small fee, so it's like $1 or something like that.
Yeah.
Or is it variable depending on the price of Ethereum, or is it just?
Yeah, it's variable on the price of Ethereum. It's hardcore than that. Yeah, I think so. Speaking of pricing model for it, I think one thing is that the typical way that most kind of platforms make money in this space is they take a percentage of the transactions themselves. And, that didn't sit well with us when we were kind of like designing our fee model, right? The reason being is that if you look at what's happening with OpenSea, OpenSea takes 2.5% of every single transaction. And what that means is that they're actually they actually bias themselves towards, the higher volume collections. And then, to us, it made no sense that, if you're providing a service, it doesn't make sense to, I would say, like penalize people just because they're more successful, right? When you provide the exact same service, right? So on Manifold, if you sell an NFT for, $1 or, $1 million, the cost is the exact same. Whereas, on OpenSea, that would be the difference between $1 and $10,000, right?
Yeah, I think it's very reasonable considering all the great services that you're providing. On the minting side, I've seen where I have to go to like a Manifold website to mint it. Do you have the ability to mint it on your own website? Is there like a piece of code where you can put a mint button there? Or do you always have to go to like a Manifold.xyz domain to actually mint it as a consumer?
So the way we do other things, the way we see Manifold underneath the hood is that we are kind of an NFT infrastructure company. And so we actually designed everything to be consumed by developers, right? So if you're actually an enterprising developer or have a developer, you can pretty much take any one of our technologies and build your own like sites around them.
Okay.
So if you really want it, you could take, so we have a widget system. You can just take one of the widgets and put that onto your own website. The most common way people are doing things right now is just using an iframe. So they'll take the Manifold page, they'll put an iframe and just like link it to on their main site, and then they can create their kind of own custom experiences around, minting on their own properties.
Looking into the future, do you have any sense of where everything is going? I mean, are you very bullish? I know we're recording this in early 2023. We're still kind of in this crypto NFT winter. Where do you see things going?
Yeah. So I'm very, very bullish on NFTs, right? Just because, you have to believe that in the future, as I spend more of our time online, right, digital objects are just going to be a thing, right? There's so many benefits that, we all experience from, interacting with the ecosystem. I think a lot of people think about NFTs and the first thing they think of is price, right? They think like, they think of them as, an investment, right? And, that was kind of sort of the case during the whole PFP bull run. A lot of people bought NFTs for very high prices, expecting to, make a return on them. But, our kind of viewpoint is NFTs are more about the consumable content rather than price of the NFT itself. And so, I think the big paradigm you have to think about is, if I think about two paradigms, is one, remember when, way back in the day when Apple started putting music online, right? People were like, they charge $1 per song. Right? People were like, why would I ever buy a song for $1, right? Digital copy of a song when I can just have a physical version of it.
Right.
Lo and behold, that business actually took off, right? People were buying digital content because it was very, very, consumer friendly. It was useful. It was easy, right? And, look at where we're at now. CDs are the thing, the physical versions of these things are just not a thing anymore, right? I guess you have vinyl, which is more nostalgic, right? So that was like the very, very first paradigm shift of, going more digital. The second paradigm shift is when I would say the App Store, right? When the mobile app stores came out, people started charging, for content in the applications themselves, right? So you're talking about games, applications. People were like, why would I pay money for a skin? Why would I pay money for accessing a level in the game, right? When the overall thing was free, or there are free alternatives. But lo and behold, the App Store is one of the biggest, for Apple and Google, they're the biggest sources of digital content out there. And so the way I see NFTs are just the next iteration that doesn't require a platform. Like you don't have to be on Apple, you don't have to be on Google to sell digital content, right? And now you have a permissionless and platformless method for selling and engaging with consumers. And, as, kids these days, they're spending all their time on Roblox, Fortnite, they're buying digital skins. And so, when they grow up, this is just going to be second nature to them. And so, you can see the idea of purchasing, digital content just being a thing, right? And you have to believe that in the future, there's going to be billions of NFTs because we're just spending more and more time online. Another interesting thing is, artificial intelligence. AI has been a very, very hot topic in the last, few months. And the thing about AI is that it's actually made digital creation, the cost of digital creation almost go down to zero. And so anybody can now create digital content. And so there's two really interesting facets of that. One of them is, first of all, how do you prove authenticity of digital content now? And so, I'm not sure if you saw, but, people are creating like, fake music videos or, music videos of, various performers that, look and sound like they're actually them, right? And so you could think about it as in the future, how will you authenticate that these are real? NFTs are the natural, solution to that. You can sign a message, you can sign a transaction saying that this is an authentic digital content and that, then can be proliferated from the artists themselves. The source of provenance of these things are going to become very, very important going forward because when something creates something, you want to know where did they come from? And that's where NFTs come into play. And so you can think of, in the future, all of these sort of things are going to come to fruition. And I think that NFTs are just going to be just, a daily part of, the internet at that point.
Richard, thank you so much, first of all, for sharing all your wisdom and your thoughts and time with us today. If people want to check out Manifold, it's Manifold.xyz. If they want to connect with you on socials, do you have a preferred place you want to send them? Is it Twitter? And if so, what's your Twitter ID?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter is just @Richard, so it's @RICHERD. Yeah, but it's with Richard with the E, not an A.
And then Manifold.xyz is where you go to find everything. Is there any other place you want to send everybody, or is that the main place if they want?
Those are two places, right? So Manifold.xyz, and we also have Manifold.xyz on Twitter.
Awesome. Richard, thank you again so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
It's good to be here. Thanks, Michael.